There's just a dual sense of justice in this country. In the name of all Indians, therefore, we reclaim this land for our Indian nations. For all these reasons, we feel this claim is just and proper, and that this land should rightfully be granted to us for as long as the river shall run and the sun shall shine. Signed, Indians of all tribes, November 1969, San Francisco, California.
Washed up here, lost, not knowing about their culture, just that they were Indian, felt that discrimination. It was a magnet. We came here, we found each other, and planned what to do to support anybody that wanted to do something for self-determination. And it became a home to a lot of people across the country. The reason I want to put this teepee back up here is to have a permanent site of national significance designation occur, and to build a place where we can have a depository of knowledge.
We have 3 generations of our family here today, and it really is us standing on the backs of the ancestors and also the backs of those leaders that chose to take over this island in 1969. The work that happened here catapulted the work that has happened all over the country for Native people.
Ready? 1, 2, 3. Huh.
The Lakota word for teepee means home, the people's home. That was our temple, our symbol for families. And it was a woman that had a vision that brought the teepee. And there were 7 gods that came to her, told her to build a nation. Our teepee is the home still today. It's very appropriate to have it here because today the teepee represents all the tribes, everywhere, from the East Coast to the West Coast, everywhere. From Mexico to the relative down to South America. When you put up a teepee, it represents the entire indigenous nation.
When Robert called me up about this vision to put up the teepee, he said, I want to turn this over to some young people who will pick it up. And he said, when we do that though, I want to honor them, I want to give them a feather.
And these eagle feathers are an incredible gift. This is the best that we can give you. An eagle feather that you can use to send your prayers up to Creator God. It represents you. It represents you. It represents your beauty. It represents your capacity. It represents your prayer. It represents your people. It represents our nations. So don't be careless with it. And it will always take care of you and protect you. Never forget, you have Indian blood in you. You have blood that tells a story all the way to the beginning of time. You have blood that carries the voices and the prayers and the songs and the stories of your grandmothers and your grandfathers. It led you here to this moment in time. So never forget that. Never forget.
Wow. Who led?
Well, we're going to be starting off this event with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples. Before we start our discussion, I would like to ask Mary if she can do us the honor of starting us off with a reflection and prayer.
Thank you, Guled. I'd be honored. I want to ask everybody to take a deep breath in. I want to thank Creator for giving us that breath of life. I want to ask our Creator to bring blessings and protection on all that are gathered here, their families and their loved ones. I ask each person to listen with an open heart, mind, and accept that no one person is better or less than any other person here. Each person must respect all creation and act as protectors of our Earth Mother, our waters, and our air. That is our life. Our Earth Mother has been here and sustained us since the beginning of creation. It sustained our ancestors and all their efforts to bring us here today, to allow us to be here today, to allow us to join here today. And we have the responsibility that we continue our efforts to bring healing and equality to each one of us, to each person, to our earth, to our waters, to our air, so that we can clear the way and give a future to our children, grandchildren, and all those that come after us. I pray for this, for all that are here and all that are here in spirit with us. Thank you. Aho.
Aho.
Yes.
Wow. Well, first of all, I want to welcome everyone who signed in today for Glide's event around learning and falling in love with our Native American sisters and brothers and their heritage and their culture and their spirituality. So thank you all for joining. And let me tell you, we are all in for a treat. We have such an array of experience and beauty on this panel. I'm humbled to be even on this Zoom thing with all of them because they are just incredible leaders in the Native American indigenous communities, not only locally, but around the world. And so we're very, very honored to have them. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction of all of them. And we are in for a treat tonight. So ladies and gentlemen, hold on tight because we're going to learn and get schooled and we're going to celebrate our sisters and brothers. So I want to start with Keith Harper, who is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. Now, Keith is the first Native American ambassador, who was appointed to be an ambassador for the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva by President Obama. Imagine the very first Native American U.S. ambassador, long overdue, but I'm so thrilled that my brother Keith was appointed to this esteemed role, because it's not just about him, but it's people as well. And so just want to acknowledge that. He was also part of a very huge class action lawsuit, and represented 500,000 individual Native Americans against the US government. And it was called the Cobell versus Salazar case. And Keith may want to share with us, but they were able to finally settle for $3.4 billion, which was the largest settlement on behalf of Native Americans. He was a staff attorney at a NARF, Native American Rights Fund, from 1995 to 2006. He has taught federal law rights, federal Indian law rights at Catholic University. And right now, I think he's at Brown teaching a course. He's taught at Columbia School of Law and American University, my alma mater. He's been a Supreme Court Justice of the Supreme Court on the Porach Band of Creek Indians, and appellate justice for the Mashanatucket Pewauk Tribal Court. He has received the numerous awards for his leadership, but not only his leadership, his passion for the community and all the work that he's done to support them. Next, we have our sister Gail Small from Northern Cheyenne, from Montana. She's a trained sociologist and attorney. She is fierce, knows the law, started her career at the California Indian Legal Services, fighting for fishing rights, and then went on to work with Indian Freedom Work, as well as being an adjunct professor at Humboldt State University. She helped form Native Action, which is an organization out of Northern Cheyenne. She has championed the people's rights for education, health, and prosperity on her reservation where she currently lives. But she's a fierce environmental law professor and lawyer for Native Americans across the United States. And then we want to just welcome Mary, who just welcomed us with prayer. She's Mayagna, Chortega, and Seneca. And she was born and raised here in San Francisco. There's going to be, you'll notice there's a lot of San Francisco connections. She has deep roots on Alcatraz Island, as part of also the Wounded Knee occupation and AIM, the American Indian movement. She's been a fierce advocate for racial equality, freedom for political prisoners, as well as a great teacher and wisdom bearer here in San Francisco. So we just want to welcome this esteemed group of leaders. And we're going to go into the discussion. And Mary, since you're local here, and we always start with a land acknowledgement, I would love to have you share with us the importance of why land acknowledgements should be done everywhere.
Sure. For one thing, it gives acknowledgement of the people, the original people of the land, the respect, who are still the stewards and caretakers of the land. And it also gives a face of the people in the present. A lot of people think of Native Americans as something passé, or have these stereotyped images that we all look the same or act the same. And that's not true. The land acknowledgement is from the people who are occupying the land, that they give that respect and acknowledgement to not just the people who are present, but the ancestors. Like Yelamu, San Francisco. The Ramaytush people who lived here, this is unceded land. They never gave it up. And they were enslaved by the missionaries to build the missions here in the city. And many of the ancestors, they are still here underneath the land. So it gives that presence. And it also, gives the ability to talk about the history of the people. This land was not just free and empty. There were people here when the colonizers and everybody came here and said that they captured and took the land. So verbalizing the acknowledgement also is not the end all of the action. You need to put commitments behind it, reparation behind it, acknowledging that the people are in the present, and make those commitments to elevate the communities.
Wow, thank you, Mary. That's so true. And I love during the acknowledgement, we say it's unceded land, because you're so right. People did not give up their land. It was taken. And
Yes.
we've benefited from it. Even me here in this house. So thank you for sharing with us that. You know, you are all incredible activists, and you do work for the betterment of the community, but also you don't just think about yourselves. You given your backgrounds, you've all done work to promote the betterment of Indigenous peoples throughout the world, and would love to get some brief glimpse of, based on your upbringing, what inspired you to do the work you do today? And you all are doing such different work. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you were brought up and how that has inspired you today. Let's see, Keith, would you mind starting off?
Sure. First of all, Miguel, thanks to you and Glide for having me this evening. Good to be with friends. Haven't seen Gail in some time. It's good to see her on the screen now that we're in this largely virtual environment. Look, it's for me, you know, it was a combination of things coming out of college. I went to University of California, Berkeley. I grew up in San Francisco. And Glide was always such a important part of San Francisco because it was the place of sanctuary for so many people. And that was something that I think anybody of conscience recognized. And, you know, going to Berkeley, I just thought that, you know, I saw a combination of things, real challenges for Indian country stemming from a long and often brutal history with the United States. But I also saw a number of opportunities, that there were people of good conscience, people of who understood that at the end of the day, if you wanted to see the advancement of Indian people, you needed to give them self-governance. You needed to ensure their self-governance. And that, you know, not that tribes or tribal nations always make perfect decisions. They don't. No governments do. But that in the aggregate, they're going to make better decisions for their people than a bureaucrat in Washington or a bureaucrat in Sacramento. And so it was this idea that we're going to depart from some patriarchal notions of imposing policies, and instead empowering tribal communities to be self-governing. And that, you know, for me, it was exciting to be sort of part of that endeavor to empower communities to first define the objectives that they have, but then implement those objectives through policy shifts, through litigation, through a series of activities that allow you to implement that policy. And so that's what drove me to want to participate in Indian law and policy, because I saw it as both a challenge that Native communities were facing, but also the opportunity to address those challenges in a real sense, given the current legal, political realities. And so it's not one without the other. There are sometimes challenges that are so endemic, so buried in the system that they're so hard to make any progress on. What I saw during college and then going to law school is that we could make a difference if we worked together, we worked collaboratively, we ensured that people who actually spoke for communities were empowered to make the decisions for those communities. And that, at the end of the day, is what all this concept of tribal sovereignty is all about, that tribes get to make the decisions for themselves rather than having imposed policies on them. And that has set the groundwork for the success of tribal communities in the last 50 years.
Keith, you say something really interesting that I think a lot of people don't know, is that even today, tribal governments are sovereign nations. And I remember when I was working for Congresswoman Barbara Lee, there was a discussion about a tribe that wanted to create a casino. And people were discussing, and they said, well, Miguel, what do you think? And I said, frankly, it's none of our business. The tribe will do what they need to do because they're sovereign nations. They have to do what they got to do. And but a lot of people still forget that when we talk about state, local, that we need to add state, local, and tribal governments because they are sovereign governments. So
Miguel, that's an important point. And what's very interesting on the gaming issue in particular is that if you look around the country, about 60% of tribes have some type of gaming establishment. As in contradistinction to states, states have about 48 out of the 50 states have some kind of gaming. So, we question the tribal gaming when tribes decide that as an economic opportunity is good for their community as a sovereign decision, we question that. But when 48 out of 50 states decided, we don't question that.
Right.
So this is sort of the disconnect between when indigenous communities decide for themselves and when non-indigenous communities decide for themselves. And we need to make it so that we understand that those are equal decisions, and each community should be able, each polity should be able to decide for itself whether it proceeds with a particular process or doesn't proceed.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Gail, you have done a little work in and I say little being facetious, legal work. But you grew up on the res and there in Montana. And what part of growing up there that helped inspire you to do the work you do today? And you do a lot of different things. So please share.
I think it's always important that we introduce ourselves, like in the protocol that we have on the reservation. Like on the reservation, you're known by who is your mother. Where, like women are very powerful on these reservations. And that's what, like, I always think about, like, Gloria Steinem's a good friend of mine because she's a good friend of Wilma Mankiller. Wilma was my sister. She came to Lame Deer a lot for healing. And so I know a lot of these feminists. And I always say, that, we look at femininity differently. We've always been in power in indigenous communities as women. So like I'm a member of my tribe. I have 5 sisters. I have 4 brothers. And I come from a large extended family. I grew up on my mother's land. And my dad, who is from the neighboring village, when he married my mother, he moved to her village, to her land. And my mother was, she was a, what you would call, like, her mother died in childbirth. So my mother was kept alive on horse milk. And so we are very close to the horse. The horse and my family are like our brother, our sister. So we have that integral feeling of animals, plants, like the stars. Like tonight, I was talking to my grandchildren about when we've lost a lot of Cheyennes in COVID. And I was talking to them about an old grandma that died today on my reservation, and how I said she's on her way home. She's climbing the Milky Way right now, her spirit. We have a word for that they're on their way through the Milky Way into the next world to join her relatives. So like the world that we live in is a very small part of the worldview that we live. And we see that. You know, my mother used to always say like in Montana, Northern Cheyenne, there's a wildflower that only grows one day. And if you catch it when it blooms that day, it's magnificent. And then it dies. And she used to say, we are like that wildflower. There's a word in our tribe. And she said, we are like that plant, that beautiful flower. When you flower, you do your best because you don't know how long you're going to be here. But how exciting the next world is going to be, because you're going to climb the Milky Way. You're going to be a spirit, a stasom, and you're going to join all the relatives. And how they describe heaven is really pretty amazing. You know, I think every culture must have a vision of heaven. You know, like for the Cheyenne, we believe that the grass is as high as the horse's belly. That's always the first thing. And that we're living along a river, a flowing, beautiful river. All the people are camped there. The dogs are running. The children are running. The food is plentiful. The buffalo are here. The elk are here. The eagles are flying. And so that's the world, you know, that we envision as heaven. We're with the relatives. So I say that because I think that our worldview, particularly now in the time of the pandemic and the time of COVID, when we've lost libraries, Miguel. That's the only way I can describe it. In the Western world, you know, they put all their books in libraries, right? Their knowledge is all in libraries. But see, our knowledge is living. And so all of our elders who have died this year, and there's so many across the Northern Plains, people have no idea what has happened to us up here in the Northern Plains with COVID. We have lost generations of elders with tremendous knowledge within the last 2 years that has, you know, it's like brought us to our knees. But there's a saying in our tribe, and I've said this to my kids so often: in life, you will get knocked to your knees often. You get up. And in the words of my mother, if you have to crawl, you crawl, but you never give up. And that's where we are right now in the Northern Plains. The Northern Great Plains, we're like, you know, we still, hey brother, we're still living it up here. We still have the knowledge. We still have the culture, the language. I mean, we're still living as the indigenous peoples of the United States of America.
Right. You know, Gail, you're doing a project that I'd love for you to share with the group here, where you're working with elders on one of his language preservation.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's very, very important to you. Can you share with us that work?
You know, language is part of our our worldview. Like, you know, when we talk about, say like my name, let's think about my name. It's an image.
Mm.
And so the only way you can understand in our language is by an image. So like my first name, as I was born as a child, you're given a name, and it was by my mother's best friend on the reservation. And so I'm the woman standing in front of the forest. That's an image. And then as I moved through my life, you know, I ended up, you know, I dropped out of high school, Miguel. I couldn't endure the racism and the torment I went through on the border towns. You know, we were called such horrible names, you know, and I hate to say this name, but we were called prairie niggers, you know, and they wouldn't throw the basketball to us. They were putting drugs in our milk and our juice at the high school dinner table because we were like the Cheyennes fighting the coal miners. And these were all coal miners' kids. And so that's the reality of our life, and it's still going on. And so as we grow older, you start looking at, you know, why were we treated this way? But it goes back to like, it's like the Western mindset is so clever. I like that word clever in English, because what our brother Keith said about the international paradigm, how Indian tribes are looked at in the United States, nobody knows that we're even governments. That's intentional, but it's clever. You know, they have intentionally taught the American public that we are erased, we're invisible, that we are no more. We are not governments. We have no court system. We have no language. We have no knowledge that is of value. They taught that, and this is a whole critical race theory argument, right? But like, we know our knowledge is important. You go to my sister Sarah James in Alaska. She can tell you how important it is that we not depend on the white man's bullets to hunt caribou, because we have to have food on our table. You better know how to get caribou the way we've always had. So that indigenous knowledge is so critical. But you know, it's like the American people, they don't understand that we're still here. We can help you with global climate change. We can help you understand why so many people are committing suicide. We can help you save the world. But our knowledge is not accepted as legitimate because of the cleverness. They're so clever. They teach the American people that we are not human beings. It's real heavy.
Yeah. But you know, Gail, every time I talk to you, we talk about your reservation and things that are going on, but there's so much hope, like your daughter Desi and the work that she's doing using science and research to make sure that the needs of Indian people. So I'm so grateful that the work you do to face the challenges, but you keep moving. So thank you for that. Mary, you know, you grew up here in San Francisco, and would love to hear from you how part of your upbringing has inspired your work today.
You know, growing up in the city, urban, right? That term urban and intertribal, because we all learn to survive together. And so we shared traditions that kind of merged together and emerged to create what we see our children, how they dance. You know, in each nation, there's societies and clans. And in the city, a lot of our children don't know that. It hasn't been passed down to them. And so what we are faced, well, let me backtrack here. I was born in the 50s. So I grew up in the era of the civil rights movement. So there was a lot of things going on around us. And, you know, toward the end of the 60s, that's when AIM, you know, came into the presence, and it became the identity of the urban people, you know, to stand up, to start, you know, asserting treaty rights that have been neglected. You know, that's what Alcatraz was all about. You know, it was discarded federal land, and it was intended by the Fort Laramie Treaty to be returned back to the Indian people. And so we needed a cultural center here. We needed an education center here. And so a lot of the people that went to Cal, that went to UCLA, you know, put together and said, you know, we need to claim this and create those institutions for our people there, you know? And so that's what it was about. You know, it wasn't just an occupation and putting a teepee up there. And even to this day, a lot of people who are not Native people don't understand that. You know, I see people coming together for the sunrise ceremony, and they're wanting to learn, but there's still so much work to be done in that. And so that's been the pedestal of my inspiration here, raising my children here, having to fight a school system that still in their books, they talk about the genocide, or they have them do a 4th grade mission project, you know, and our students, you know, we have the highest suicide rate. We have the highest, you know, dropout rate. Those things are the things that we need to address here, and bringing that identity to our children. You know, we're doing it. There's great things that are happening in the city. We just now got a cultural district. You know, we are building a building next to the Friendship House, the Village Project, that is going to be a hub of a lot of essential services for the community. But there's so much more to do. You know, we have an indigenized project that is putting up banners to let people know we are here, and this is Ramaytush land, and bringing it into the present. But, you know, growing up here, I know for myself, my family struggles, you know, not being able to live where we wanted to or afford it. You know, my dad was out of work more often than he was working. And, you know, he had a promise of skills and trades, but it didn't afford us to be able to live where we wanted in comparison to other people in the community. And so, you know, in the 60s, like I said, the occupation of Alcatraz brought that voice into the present. Glide was, Cecil and Glide, you know, they gave us office space where we could organize. We had our Wounded Knee Defense Fund office and our AIM office there. So we were able to organize locally with a lot of people. So a lot of folks that came off from Alcatraz stayed with us and organized. But there is so much more to do now in giving identity. We have our children, my grandson's going to Cal. So Keith, we got a seed there.
Go Bears.
But, yeah, right. And, you know, there's incredible things that's going on in the media, you know, that there's a presence and an elevation of Native writers and productions. So we're hoping to get that education and that visiting, you know, but as Gail said, you know, having the elders, you know, to give that, you know, to share that, you know, the sharing I could think about from my mother and my aunt, what they gave me personally and showed me, and I experienced with them, you know, are the things that we need to do more of for our children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, thank you for sharing that, Mary. And actually want to thank you for sending us the photograph of Reverend Cecil Williams and others from AIM at Glide. And we didn't know that history until I saw that photograph. So thank you.
Sure.
You know, Gail had said something that was really important to me about saving the world. You know, our auntie LaDonna Harris, Comanche, she started an organization called Americans for Indian Opportunity. And one day I was in Washington and she was there with her ambassadors, and she said, Miguel, why don't you go talk to them? And I had just left the meeting with a bunch of folks talking about the environment. And I got so angry because they were talking about organic this, solar panel that, but no one was talking about understanding. And environmentalists always think it's all about composting and recycling, but it's indigenous people, it's native people that say it's about our understanding of our place in the world. And so I actually think, you know, we have all these people that go up on television and call themselves made environmentalists. I think actually we should be following the lead of indigenous people, because you all go beyond just composting and recycling. It's about how we see ourselves in this world and how we protect Mother Earth, which I think is a much more powerful and much more sustainable way to think of how we think of the environment. And so, Gail, you know, I know you're doing, and well, all of you are doing it from a local to a global level. So I just wanted to point that out, that please help us save this world, save this planet.
You know, Miguel, there's strategies that we can do to enhance our knowledge and share it. And I always think that Indigenous people are so giving. You know, we are giving of our knowledge because we know it's not about helping just ourselves. You know, we're part of humanity and we're part of a interconnected world. So like in my case, like the Custer National Forest is adjacent to my reservation. And acknowledge that name, Custer National Forest. It's the largest forest running through South Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming. Check out that name, Custer. Now, my tribe defeated Custer, along with the Sioux and Arapaho in military battle. When I've grown up with the songs and the stories, when the Custer battle occurred, we were in ceremony. We were in church, brother. We were in Sundance ceremony. This is our church where we renew the world. We don't renew it for just us. We renew the world in our ceremony. So there we were, camped along the river, peaceful tribes, children running everywhere. And here comes Custer, the 7th Cavalry, invading us, out to kill our women and children. We fight back. And in the process, we killed a golden-haired boy that we had no idea was going to be president. He was being primed for president of the United States. But we killed him and his people because they were after us. They were going to kill us. And in the process, we had no idea what was going to unfold, the retaliation and the wrath of this country against the Cheyenne. But now you think about our history, right? What happened there? You know, where is peace? How can we achieve peace when there's so little common ground, so little knowledge? And then now they take all our land and they call it the Custer National Forest and they keep the Cheyenne out. I brought a lawsuit and I went into that forest and I identified all the Cheyennes who are buried in that forest. We have Cheyenne people buried all over on our homeland. And I said, we want access to our loved ones. And you can no longer steal their bodies. They were going in and digging up our grandparents and selling their bodies to the Field Museum, the Smithsonian. I said, how can you go in? And I said, how would you like it if I went and dug your grandparent up and sold her body? This is the atrocity. And so like now, we want hunting rights in the Custer Forest because our people are starving. You know, with COVID, there's very little access to food. You talk about indigenous food. We're hunters. We're subsistence people. We need access to the elk that migrate through our reservation to what is now called Custer Forest. What is that going to take to get access? We're not asking for the land back, although we would love to be able to use the Custer Forest for grazing rights for the Cheyenne ranchers, but no, that's been shut out. They're very clever. They've given the grazing rights to non-Indian ranchers, and there's no way you can break in to the grazing rights. They go to the bank with their grazing rights. It's hereditary. They hand it down generation to generation of these white ranchers. We can't even get in to the Custer Forest to graze our cattle. All we want is just to hunt the elk. Can we please get back to our homeland, to hunt the elk, to keep our people alive? I have represented elder Cheyennes who have been arrested for trespass, going into the Custer Forest to just gather the plants, the herbs, and the soils that we use in our Sundance. They arrest us, our elders, and throw them in jail for accessing the Custer Forest. It's outrageous. I represented a hunter, a Cheyenne hunter, who was thrown up against his pickup, guns drawn to him. I have so many stories I could tell you that are outrageous. We're just trying to survive. You talk about indigenous food sovereignty, that's a sexy term. Indigenous food sovereignty. The reality is that we got to have our land. We got to have access to our food in order to make that a reality, brother.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Gail, there's a lot more we have to learn. And what it says, Cesar Chavez says, you can't unteach a person. So this opportunity is to teach all of us. So hopefully we could do something, and we're going to be asking later on what we can do to be helpful. But one, keep up the work because it's too important. And I know, especially the people that you represent there. Keith and I actually went there. You took us to the I don't even want to call it Custer, but you took us to that location when we were
It's called the Battle of the Little Bighorn now.
Yes.
Think about this, Miguel. In the military war thinking, when you win a battle, you win the land, right? You're the conqueror. Cheyennes were conquerors. We defeated the United States in military battle. The American flag went down. We picked it up. Why isn't the Custer battlefield our land in military parlance?
Right.
That's the question.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. Well, with all of you, whether it's urban or rural or global, there's been a lot of issues that you all have been working on that we have a lot to learn about. But one thing I would love to know from you is, where do you get your medicine? Where do you get your strength to keep moving? And so I'm just going to open it up. Where do you get your medicine?
I'll offer some thoughts, Miguel. It seems to me, as both Mary and Gail have articulated, I think we get our medicine from our people. Native people have a built-in resilience. And it's one based on our history. It's one based on our experience. It's one based on our need to not only survive, but thrive in challenging conditions. And we've learned these over the centuries, when many Native people have been, torn asunder through contact. But what we've realized and what we understand, and what I think keeps a lot of our communities striving forward, is that this resilience is critical to ensuring that our way continues. Our cultural ways continue, our religious ways continue, our way of thinking about the world continues. And I think most Americans should celebrate that. Most people around the world should celebrate that, because thinking Indigenous is important. Because thinking Indigenous is what's going to save the planet. We're faced with this existential threat of climate change. And I think thinking in a non-Indigenous ways often leads us to saying, what's in the near-term benefit? How can we exploit the earth? But thinking of it as in an Indigenous way, we're thinking, well, what's going to be good not only for my children, but my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren and 7 generations ahead. And yes, that notion of 7 generations is specific to the Haudenosaunee, but many Native cultures think about the world in terms of what is good for not only the children, but the great-grandchildren and many generations to come. And this conceptual framework is what is needed right now, because it is this conceptual framework that is going to lead us out of the darkness. It's this conceptual framework that is going to allow us to think about the long term instead of the near term. And this is the Indigenous way of thinking. And so it's not just that, we as a society should galvanize about Indigenous rights because it's the right thing to do, but we should galvanize Indigenous rights because it's the smart thing to do. Because Indigenous rights and Indigenous ways of thinking are going to lead us towards a path of thinking about the earth and thinking about all our relations, as the Lakota talk about and the Cheyenne talk about, the entirety of those things that are related to us, not just humans, but others, the trees, the plants, the animals, that the entirety of the relations are important. And when we look at something like climate change, obviously that's a much better framework than to think about how can we exploit and gain benefit and gain prosperity from exploiting, rather than thinking about it in terms of how do we as human society interact with the natural world in a way that's going to ensure that we set the foundation for our continuing existence for years, and the continuing existence of the earth and all living beings in the future as well.
Wow. Well, first of all, Keith, thank you for that, because you've just invited us all to think in an Indigenous way, which I love it, because then it's not, we can't think that way because we're not, right? So now to me, I found that as a wonderful invitation for us to think differently. and hopefully think in a way like your people's way so that we can be better stewards of this land as well. Mary, where do you get your medicine?
You know, Keith said it so well, because it is from each other, you know, it is the value of each other. It is, you know, I think about, and I said it earlier, you know, we have to pray for the protection of our Earth Mother and the water. You know, so much has been polluted and corrupted, you know, the importance of water, you know, people get in these little plastic things, you know, but what if you couldn't turn on the water in your home? What if it was gone tomorrow? Water is the most basic need that we have. It's purifying, but without water, you'll be dead soon, you know? And, you know, Western medicine now, you know, it's, I think about how they take it, like the young lady, I'm sorry, her name escapes me right now, that talks about climate change.
Greta,
right. You know, all of a sudden the spotlight was on her. But we've been saying that. We've been living that. You know, our elders, you know, have talked about climate change and have talked about that if you don't take care of the earth, what's going to happen? Nobody listened. But this one child gets up there, this white child, and then all of a sudden it's like, ooh, oh, it's a revelation, you know? I get my medicine, you know, when I speak to the youth, you know, because they are so precious. They are so precious. They are our future. And they're looking to us for the answers. They're looking to us to give them the way and the purification that they just need to know that there's something tomorrow, and their identity and their spirit, you know. Western medicine, I gotta speak to this because, you know, everything becomes a fad. Elderberry, we've known it's good for our immune system. We take it, we eat it, we drink it. Now it's in cough syrups. You know, you go to these Walgreens and stuff and you'll see all of a sudden there's this explosion of elderberry everything. Well, we knew that. We've shared that, but you haven't heard it until you package it and have to sell it. Our medicine is free. We take what's needed and replenish it so that there'll be more for the future. And so, you know, we're doing that, you know, Gail was talking about the Indigenous food sovereignty projects. They're popping up all over the place, you know, literally on rooftops, you know, and all over the place to bring back traditional medicines. But what about the lands? What about the lands? You know, those lands are still being kept from us. You know, each nation had their own medicines that took care of the people that lived there, and the people took care of that land. And when you separate it, you know, it's like stealing a child from their mother. You know, we have to be able to get back to that. And as Gail said, we share because that's our nature. You know, that's how we were taught. We weren't taught greed. We were taught share and share that wisdom. So I get it everywhere, Miguel.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yep.
Sister Gail, your medicine, where would you get it from? Or where do you?
Something's been real heavy on my mind since yesterday, yesterday was the anniversary of the Sand Creek Massacre, 1864. That happened in Colorado among the Cheyenne and the Arapaho. That's my people. That's our land, Colorado, Montana, the Dakotas. This is where the Cheyenne people lived, the Black Hills. But the massacre that happened yesterday, it was really riveting. And they call this generational trauma, and you feel it. And my mother used to tell this story. My mother is a spotted elk and a wooden leg. So her mother is Jessie Spotted Elk. Her dad was Tom Wooden Legs. Richard Wooden Legs was the warrior who fought Custer. There's a book about him. He actually fought in the Custer battle. And then when my mother's mother died in childbirth with her, he and his wife, Sophie, raised my mother. So the Custer battle is not something in history. My grandpa fought in the Custer battle. This is how real it is. Our ancestors give us medicine. Now the Spotted Elk side, her mother's side, the woman who died in childbirth with her, her dad, which would have been my mother's grandpa, was 2 years old at the Sand Creek Massacre that happened yesterday in 1864 in Colorado. His mother was killed viciously. All the Cheyennes were massacred by volunteer army, kind of like these crazy patriots in this country today. Volunteer army, whoever heard of such a thing? And he was a Methodist minister. Colonel Chivington led this fight and massacred my mother's mother. He's 2 years old, Miguel. Think about that. His sister's 4 years old. They're digging a hole in the dry riverbank to hide. Everyone's killed, murdered by these crazy drunk white men that are Methodist ministers. The little 4-year-old sister takes her little 2-year-old brother to his dead mother's body, puts him on her breast to feed, to breast milk, to keep him alive for 2 days. That is a horrific story that I've been thinking about since yesterday. What happened at this massacre yesterday in 1864 that my mother's ancestor was kept alive on his dead mother's breast milk. And that's how I'm alive today. This is my medicine, brother.
Yeah. Gail, you have some incredible children, and now you have incredible grandchildren. What medicine do you want to give them as they grow older and become leaders in the reservation?
I try to give them the knowledge I grew up with. And for my kids, it's like, you need to live off the land. Like I grew up knowing every flower, every plant, every herb, how to harvest them when they come into season. Because I've always believed, like my mother always said, you may go to the grocery store one day and there's nothing in the grocery store. We have one store on the reservation. So we grew up on the land. And so I try to teach them how to live off our land, be able to take care of yourself, be able to hunt, be able to gather the roots, the plants, the berries, and how to store them, how to take care of yourself and the people. And what that requires is that you take care of the land. And that's why we fight for water rights. Like Mary talked about water. We believe water has a spirit. You know, I took Western water law. I'm a water law expert. I negotiated my tribe's water rights case for 12 years. The white man, the Western water law, this is their concept of water. Use it or lose it. That is contradictory to our thinking. We believe that there has to be enough water to keep the spirit going, keep it alive. The only way I could contemplate that was in-stream flow. So I try to, you know, it's like a painful process. We have to learn the Western world's thinking to save them, save themselves. And it's a painful, like my water law professor was Charles Wilkinson. And he used to tell me, Gail, it's painful. You have to figure out how the white man thinks to help save them. And so that's like Western water law needs to be changed. But the policy and the law are very difficult to change because it means money. And so much of agriculture is dependent on water. And like one lawyer told me, Gail, I can't believe you. You really believe there are water spirits? Gail, you know more than that. You're a damn lawyer. And see, that's the conflict of our thinking in this country. Like Keith talks about, you know, our way of thinking can save the world. It's going to require the non-Indians to open their minds to a different way of thinking.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's medicine for us. All right. And it leads us to the last question to the panel. And Gail, it was such a great sort of segue into this question is, what can we do as people in San Francisco or people from around the country that are zooming in? What can we do to be supportive? And, you know, we have, again, from local to global perspective, what was something that or some things we can do to help support Indigenous communities?
You know, Miguel, I think that everyone is at their own level of change, but it's an individual responsibility. So like as a parent, you may be a parent in San Francisco schools or wherever, but you know what? You can advocate for truth, truth in history. Tell the truth in the history books, what happened. And you can advocate for that. When your little kindergarten kids comes home in this crazy headdress for Thanksgiving, you can say that is wrong. And we're going to tell the truth, right? And then when there's other cases that are coming before, but I want to stress our democracy is in peril. I have been a voting rights advocate. We brought a federal Indian Voting Rights Act case throughout the Northern Great Plains. You know, Miguel, the freedom that we have today is in jeopardy. Everyone has to step into power, sisters and brothers, and fight for our democracy. We are living in a very vulnerable time that we could lose our democracy. And it's not just voter suppression. It's an entire intentional, strategic effort to take over our country. And I'm not being fear-mongering. Look at our Supreme Court, what happened? So, you know, I really advocate that individuals have to take responsibility to protect the freedoms that we have today. And we have to talk the truth. Like we always say, walk the truth. But in our case, brother, it's going to be a little more active. We have to be there in the front rows. We have to be the candidates. And we have to support those people like, you know, in Montana, we have a Senator Tester. He comes to the reservations all the time. He knows our issues. and he's our advocate. We support those kind of people. But boy, we are living in a time in our history that is going to set the trajectory for our great grandkids. We have a big burden, responsibility on our shoulders to step in to leadership. Thank you.
No, thank you, Gail. Brother Keith, what can people do to be supportive, get out of the way? But what can we do? You're on mute. There we go.
Miguel, you know, part of the issue is that as Gail has so eloquently expressed, to learn more about Native people and the impact of federal policies on Native people. But what I would like to emphasize is that the way of thinking about the world, and this is not just about Native Americans, this is about Indigenous peoples worldwide, and thinking about the world in a different way. I think that too often in our societies, we think about the world as resources that we can exploit. And I think the way Indigenous people see the world is a little bit different. It's about how do we live within the world, within those resources, ensuring their protection over the long term. And it's that perspective, that very Indigenous perspective, that is not specific to Native people in the United States, but is just a way of tribal people around the world thinking about their interactions with the world, that can inform policy decision-making. And as we face the challenge of climate change, as we face the myriad of issues impacting the global community, I think understanding the way that people who are close to the earth think about the world is a helpful viewpoint. And too often it gets overlooked, because too often it's not the empowered viewpoint. Too often it's not the viewpoint that makes a lot of money. Too often it's not the viewpoint that catalyzes the exploitation of the earth for gain. But if we're looking at what actually is going to allow humanity to move forward in a direction that is secure and safe, precautionary and effective, then I think the Indigenous viewpoint is the viewpoint that we really ought to study to a far greater degree, because of the reasons that Gail and Mary have articulated this evening. It's the viewpoint that is the one that says we should take a step back. It's the viewpoint that says we need to understand what's important. And what's important at the end of the day is the survival of humanity, the survival of the things that we care about, the survival of all the relations that is going to ensure our future. And so too often we overlook that. And I think what Indigenous peoples say, whether they're Native American or Maori or what have you, is that it's this viewpoint that is going to ensure that future.
Wow. Well said. Thank you so much, Keith. Mary, any thoughts?
Whole lot of thoughts. Learn. You know, too often people, approach us and tell us what they know about us. Stop, listen, learn from us, listen to what we have to say, advocate for visibility. If you work in companies, you can create land acknowledgements and tailor it to what it is that you do that will acknowledge the people and the land, and support and protect. Advocate for the removal of all the stereotypical and offensive images, right? The names, the mascots. Look around you. The streets of San Francisco are inundated by people who killed Native people, and, so often locally, where we've advocated for the removal of things that are hurtful to our students, change that curriculum, people hold on to, they want to support and everything until it touches them personally. They don't want to change the name of the school that they went to because of their memories of that school, even though the person that school is named after perpetrated genocide on the people that you're saying that you're sensitive for. Be truthful. Yeah. Be truthful. Get involved. Contact, your local American Indian organizations. There is a lot of work to be done, a lot of support that's needed. Help elevate our voices. We need allies, to be heard. But there's plenty that can be done. The work has just started.
Yeah. Mary, thank you so much for that. I know the work that you're doing there at Friendship House on 15th and Julian. For anybody who's interested, it's in the Mission District, in the heart of the Native American Cultural District. This is one step for us here at GLIDE that hopefully it's in a continuum of many steps that GLIDE has taken to try to educate. Because what I hear is learn and be truthful and seek the truth, right? And I started earlier in the conversation about GLIDE wanting to be truth seekers and truth tellers. Mm-hmm. And I think we've heard that loud and clear from all of you. And we hope that in all your efforts, or in some of your efforts that you're working on, please let us know. GLIDE through the Center for Social Justice, as well as through our congregation. And I see Linda Mantell here, who's a leader on the church side. We want to be your justice warriors as well. And so we will look at putting things on our website to educate people, but also if there's non-political campaigns, but campaigns for water rights, we want to know about it so that we can get people and other people to be educated on the issue and get them to sign petitions or to go out and to talk to people about it. I think what you just said, Mary, about schools, there's a big debate right now in San Francisco about school naming and imagery. We have to do what's right and what's just. Keith, you reminded us that we have to look beyond just our own backyard, but look at the situation of Indigenous people throughout the world. And that's a good reminder for us to keep our mind and our hearts open to what's happening around the world. Water, air knows no boundaries, right? And so we all breathe that same air and we all rely on the same water. And Gail, you've taught us that being aware of history, but also calling upon our ancestors for that type of medicine to move us forward is going to give us the hope. And is going to allow our children and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren to be those prophets to have a vision for a better world. And so we got to set them up for success in that by what we do today. All three of you have truly, truly, truly blessed us here at Glide. And all of you that are watching and are listening, you're part of that blessing because you will help us to help all of us make this world a better place. And that's why we do these series every month. I cannot thank you enough, Keith, Mary, and Gail, for your time. I know it's late for all of you, but I know some people are on the East Coast, so appreciate that. And you're in the plains over there, Gail. So thank you for staying up late. Mary, thank you for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I want to thank Hannah, Eric, and Goulet from the Glide team who helped us make this happen. Please continue to share. We're going to have this on our website, so you'll be able to review it, take notes, learn from it, and we'll have some information about the different organizations that our panelists are a part of so that you can check those out as well. So as Keith says, learn. Thank you all for joining us this evening. You know, have a wonderful night, have a wonderful week, have a wonderful new year. Stay blessed, stay wonderful. And just again, thank you all for being a part of this. Bye, everyone.